Okay, so we continued the journey of the lessons that we've been doing, biblical theology, and today we're talking about the patriarchs, thwarting God's mission to the nations. And so that's the title, the patriarchs. Once again, we used this picture last time. We'll talk more about who they are, but I want to make sure we're all in the same flow of what's happening. You know I keep repeating myself, but I think it's important that you get where we're coming from, or else you get to lose the whole essence. Biblical theology is understanding the story of Christ in the whole Bible, the story of redemption. We started with the resurrection. We opened up after the resurrection with Exodus. From Exodus, we are given the story of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. And who were they given to? They were given through Moses to the Israelites. And so we started with these. Uh-oh. Should have checked it. Technical difficulties.
Right.
I'll tell.
Okay, good. So we started with these 5. After the Exodus, we started with these 5 ideas. So remember, who is the audience right now? Who is receiving all of this? It is the Israelites. Who are these Israelites? These Israelites are not the Israelites that we often come to think. These are just fresh out of the boat, in a sense, slaves. They just came out of Egypt. They don't know much about their God. They know little bits and pieces. But they know they've been enslaved and the Lord has redeemed them, but they don't really know who this God was. So we talked about how God revealed himself in creation. Then we talked about the fall. Then we talked about the flood. Then we talked about Abraham last week. And so since we talked about Abraham last week, let me go a little bit over what was the last thing we talked about. In Abraham, we realized that God chooses Abraham to continue his redemption story, the seed promise. I don't know who was here last 2 weeks ago, but can anybody remember the passage where the first time the seed is mentioned? Let's see, Chris.
Genesis 2.
Genesis 4.
Genesis 1.
3. Genesis 3.
Was it closer to 4 or 3?
2:16.
Can I get a 3? Can I get a 2?
Okay. Genesis 3.
3 2.
16.
3 6. 3 6.
24.
3
12. Do you remember what I said about John 3:16?
16 3.
15.
Yes. Minus 1. It says Genesis 3:15.
Yeah,
Genesis 3. All right, it was close. Next time.
we got the book. We got the book, guys.
So Genesis 3:15. Okay. So we remember that the seed promise is continuing, and God promises Abraham 3 things, which is a family. Eventually, that family ends up becoming a nation. But right now, we see it as a family in Abraham's understanding. A great name and a land. And of course, all of these are encompassed in the covenant, meaning that these things are meant to be done with God. Because we realized that the Tower of Babel, previously before Abraham, was actually trying to do the same exact thing. And so we learned about this all last week, so I don't want to talk too much about it. We realized that, how does that relate to Israel, to the Israelites? Remember, we always have to ask that question. Whenever you're reading the Bible, who is the audience? You can't say, I'm the audience, because it really wasn't written for you. It was written for whoever it was written for. And in this case, the Israelites. So what does that mean when they're hearing about Abraham? What does that mean to their ears? And to them, it means that God's promises is continuing. It's still working. It's still happening. So for them to be redeemed, there's a purpose behind it. And then we go to us as Christians. Of course, as we're reading this, what does that mean to us? And we realize that also for us, the promises were fulfilled in Christ, and they're still continuing. We still haven't seen the full end of it, which will happen when Christ comes back. But it's important to realize how we fit in the string of God's story. So today's lesson, and we come to the last bit. This is not the last of biblical theology, but this is the last bit that we're receiving on behalf of the Exodus Israelites audience, and which is the patriarchs. Okay, so who are the patriarchs? We talked about it last time. Well, the actual definition of a patriarch is the male head of a family of tribe. I think matriarchs or matriarchs is the opposite. You don't see that a lot, but it's where the woman is in charge of the family household. But during those times, it was a very patriarchal family establishment. Even today, we see that a lot, where the male head is the male who is the head of the tribe or family. And so, in this case, who were the patriarchs in biblical times? The people who we often refer to the patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I put slash Israel because Israel ends up being Jacob's name. Some people include Joseph. Some might even extend it to Moses. But most people refer to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And what they stand for is for sort of like the founding fathers of how the covenant came through in regards to the Israelites. So what are they called to do? Well, in reality, we talked a little bit about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were taught to participate. I don't know if you guys remember, but we talked about how it's not about Abraham. It was always about God. So they were called to participate in God's promise of redemption. For whatever reason, God decided to use people to unfold his redemption story. And so the idea is that a family would be born, and we see that. Abraham finally has Isaac. Isaac finally has Jacob. And Jacob finally has what? Eventually the 12 children, 13 including his daughter. And then those 12 tribes spread out to make Israel. And so that's the idea. And all of that is not to form a nation. Never forget, all of this is not because God said, it would be cool if I had a family, human family. Or it'd be cool if I had our own nation. Or it'd be cool if I had a powerful nation under my name. No, it was always, don't forget, all of this always involves the seed. Because the seed is what the promise is. So, are the patriarchs the heroes of the story of Israel? When they're hearing this, are they perceiving as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as the heroes? Well, absolutely not. We always hear as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, because it is God that matters, not the people. They're in fact just a point of reference. The patriarchs, and this is just a very small list, prove to be quite the exact opposite. Abraham two times gives up Sarah. We heard this today in church, where the first time it was the Pharaoh, and the second time was another king. Abraham sleeps with Hagar in hopes of having a child because he couldn't have one with Sarah. So all the time they were trying to do things in human power. Before Hagar, he was actually trying to adopt one of his servants. One of the customs in during Abraham's time was if you couldn't bear a child, you took upon yourself one of your slaves, and that slave would be considered your child. And God said, listen, it's not going to happen through that style. It's going to happen through your loins, meaning it's going to be your flesh. So in his mind, hey, all right, I'll listen to God, but maybe I need to help you. And so him and Sarah decide, maybe Hagar, maybe that way. But obviously we know that's not the way it should have been done. Isaac ends up giving up Rebekah as well, like Abraham did. Jacob runs away from home, and he was deceitful. I only put a small list, but if you actually look at the story of the patriarchs, it's not really a pleasant story to be hearing. It's not about heroes. It's not about these these heroic figures. Sometimes you call them the pillars of faith. And mostly these people are referred more in a Jewish context. But we understand that in reality, what they're perceiving is they're seeing God at work. So what is really the whole point of this? And I want to focus a lot on this, which I think it's pretty awesome. When I heard about this, I thought this was the most unbelievable thing I've heard, which really reveals to us how amazing God is. is Genesis 15, 1 to 21. And I just want to focus on this. So if somebody can, if we could all, I see JM passed out Bibles, if we can all open up to Genesis 15, 1 to 21, and we're all going to read, we're going to go around. So starting with Brian, and then to Kale, then to Pierre. So you're going to go like this, and then Allison will be the last one. And don't think,
15.
and then Brian will start again.
How many verses are we?
Just one. Let me just go there. Okay, so Genesis 15, verses 1 to 21. So if you could start, Brian.
Okay, after this, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abraham. I am your shield, your very great reward.
But Abraham says,
No, just this way.
Oh, you said
Yeah,
me.
yeah. No, sorry, I meant to say you end over there.
Come on, man.
Come on, Kai.
But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me, since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus?
And Abraham said, You have given me no children, so the servant of my household will be my heir.
Then the word of the Lord came to him. This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir.
He took him outside and said, Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, So shall all your offspring be.
Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness.
He also said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur, of the Chaldeans, to give you this land to take possession of it.
But Abraham said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it?
So the Lord said to him, Bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon.
Abraham brought all these to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half.
Then birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away.
As the sun was setting, Abraham fell into deep sleep, and thick and dreadful darkness came over him.
And the Lord said to him, Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there.
For I will punish the nations they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions.
You, however, will go to your ancestor in peace and be buried at a good old age.
In the fourth generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure.
When the sun had set and the darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces.
On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham and said, To your descendants I give this land from the wadi of Egypt to the great river Euphrates.
The land of Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Raphites.
21.
21.
Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites.
Good. Praise God. So what is happening here? So I actually gave you a little bit of background about Abraham wanting to give his to adopt, in a sense, heir, which would be not of his loins, not of his descendant, but rather somebody who's a servant. But God says, no, it's going to come from your own loins. And so God is assuring Abraham. But something amazing happens, that if you do not know the culture, how things are done, you would miss it. In fact, I've missed it until I was brought to this understanding, which is so amazing. So God is explaining, and Abraham wants to know how. How could I know this? So God said, bring a goat and such, and cut it in half. Why? Why do they do that? So you have to understand that during Abraham's time, it's actually a Middle Eastern practice. What people would do is that they would, if they were about to have a transaction, what do we do nowadays? things. We have signatures. We have documents, and these documents are legal documents, and when we sign them, they're binding. They cannot be broken, and they are legal in the sense that there's protection behind it, especially depending how much, the heavier the wording is, obviously the heavier the legal actions would be. And so back in the day, they didn't have that. So what did they have? They had sort of an agreement between each other, an agreement of an action. And how does this action look like? What they actually used to do is that they used to cut an animal in half, and both people had to walk in between the animal. First, one person would do it, and the other person would be the second person to do it. So they would literally walk across the dead animal. What was the point of that? The point would be that if doing so, it meant that if a person did not follow or did not keep his word, they would receive a curse that would happen, that they would be split in half. In a sense, what my word, I promise you that if I don't keep my word, that's gonna happen to me. I'm gonna experience something as disgusting as being cut in half, something as horrific as being split in two, being bloody, being sacrificed, being destroyed. And so I hope that makes sense. What I'm trying to say, that as we have legal actions, that you may go to jail, you may have to pay a fine. They took it to the point of saying, listen, if I don't follow, if I don't keep my word, that's what's going to happen to me. And so the same thing would say to the other person. So that's how they kept word for each other. And so God never works out of context. God always uses what works within the context. We talked about circumcision before. Circumcision was not, the Israelites were not the first people to circumcise their people. In fact, other nations were doing it. God uses a practice but would change it to make sense to what he wants to make. And so in the sense of this, God took this, but he changed it up a bit. And what did he do differently? So Abraham, they were talking, he sliced up the animal, but what do we notice? As the sun was setting, Abraham fell into a deep sleep, and that's verse 12. And a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. And so, for some reason, he fell asleep. It was sort of like he was engulfed in darkness, and something came over him. We remember how Adam fell asleep. A deep sleep fell onto him, and we know that was God at work. And then verse 17, so God is speaking to him in a dream, and God tells him this is what's going to happen. It sort of gives him prophecy. And then when the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking fire pot with a blazing torch appeared and had passed between the pieces. If you guys remember, who's he speaking to? He's speaking to the Exodus people, right? They know what it means when there's a fire coming down and there's smoke and it's passing through. What does that signify? Who was, when they were coming out of Egypt, when they went through the desert, when they come through the Red Sea, and they're going through the desert, what is keeping them, what is allowing them to move forward and to stay put? You guys remember? Fire at night coming from the sky, and a cloud during the day. So they don't, and then Moses just experienced fire as well. So they have no doubt that this is talking about God. And so the sun had set, darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. So what does all this signifies? It's a little confusing until you realize that God passed through the sacrifice, but Abraham never did. What does that mean? What God implies here is that, listen, this covenant is not based on you. Even if you screw up, the weight is gonna fall on me. The weight is gonna fall on me as God. And so what God is saying to Abraham is that you, even though you're part of this plan, it's not you who's gonna do it. It's me. I'm carrying the weight. And if you do screw up, I'm gonna take the burden. I'm gonna take the curse, not you. And so it's amazing how we are able to identify and see grace even as far back as Abraham. And so what does this mean to the Israelites who first encountered this passage? To them, God is continuing his original plan. So after God has spoken, saying that, hey, there was going to be 400 years of captivity, you're going to come out, which they did, I still have a plan for you. It's not over. I still have something for you to do. And we'll talk about this in the next biblical theology lesson. But he's pretty much now finally confirming and saying, listen, I didn't rescue you for no reason. I just explained to you all about what my plan is. You got work to do. You got something to do. That's to the Israelites. What about to us Christians? To us, we realize that eventually God does pay for the unfaithfulness of the patriarchs and Israel at the cross. Do you realize that we are never faithful until Jesus? All the way, if you draw a line all the way to Jesus, no matter what, you pick a person, there was always unfaithfulness. So you got to ask yourself, wait a minute, if the covenant was the covenant not fulfilled in a sense? Well, the covenant was binded, but a curse did take place. And God already knew it. So obviously God being sovereign, God passed through those two birds, or the goat, and said, listen, I know you're going to screw up, but I'm still going to take this weight. I'm still going to take this splitting of the two. And guess what? It does end up happening. Christ dying at the cross ends up being the ultimate curse that takes place. And we don't take it. God takes it. So in the covenant, we don't, although we failed miserably, we don't end up taking the fault of or the penalty of the covenant. God does. And so to us Christians, that should really show us, wow, like this was truly from the beginning already sort of like a sacrificial decision from God, saying, I know I'm going to die for you. I know I'm going to miserably going to end up taking the weight of this covenant because you're going to screw up. But I'm still going to do it. And I'm still going to pull through with it. And that should draw us closer to the cross. And so as Christians, we should read the Old Testament and realize to what point did God really love us from the beginning. Not later, from the beginning. And so to the Israelites, obviously they're seeing it more as their plan is continuing. To us, we see it more as, wow, God's plan was always continuing, and it always was a plan of death on the cross. And even Isaiah mentions that, how it pleased God in a sense. And please doesn't mean like he's excited to die on the cross. Please means that it was approved by God. God put a stamp, and it wasn't a decision he made later. It was always from the beginning. And I hope by now, as we've been having these biblical theology classes, we're understanding that every single event of the Bible is connected to God's promise. This should really stabilize your foundation in your walk with the Lord. When you encounter Muslims, when you encounter Jewish people, when you encounter Christians who don't know any better, when you're shocked, or when you encounter atheists, you should realize, how much does God really love me? Because sometimes the cross seems so far away. But when you draw in the whole Bible, you realize how close you are to the cross. It's unbelievable. Because when you're looking at the cross from the standpoint of just the New Testament, it seems the cross seems really far. But when you look at it, how God really took his creation into his bosom, and he wanted it to, and wants to, and will, and has redeemed it, it's really amazing that we are part of all this. And so that's really what the whole story of the patriarchs. It was never about them. It was always about God saying, listen, you've heard all these stories about Abraham, Jacob, Isaac and Jacob. You've heard about Noah. You've heard about this. But have you heard about me? Do you know who I am? And he's just explained it to them. He explained it in creation. I explained how he plays into the fall, how the flood, how the Abraham, and eventually all the patriarchs, and you could include Joseph, and eventually to them, to the Israelites. And we see this, and we also realize that this is our story, and this is how we fit in. And so next time in Yam, we will talk about Sinai. And Sinai, can anybody tell me what happens to Sinai? What do we receive?
It's a mountain.
The Ten Commandments, as well as the other laws. But we receive the Ten Commandments. And we will realize that what we'll study next time we have Yam is that God is establishing a mission, a missionary headquarter in the name of named Israel. And so we start realizing that God was missional from the beginning as well. And it's pretty exciting to understand how God has always been the first missionary. And so Sinai we'll be studying, and we'll continue with that. So before I close, especially since we're not many, I think it would be great if we have questions. Any questions regarding the patriarchs? I mean, even those 5 things that we talked about at the beginning, I know there's been a lot. How they fit in. All this. Did you guys understand the idea of passing through, and how that was a binding understanding that, hey, if we don't follow this, whoever breaks that, it's gonna experience the same type of sort of, I guess you could say, equivalence of distress or equivalence of punishment.
Where did that come from? Like, was that like a traditional thing?
It was a custom. I mean, where did signatures come from? I don't know, but we take it as seriously.
Yeah.
You know, we put people in prison because of, you know, to a nation that's never heard of signatures. They might laugh at the idea, how can you trust a signed paper? As opposed to, for them, that's, at least they could see, you know. So it's just a custom. Anybody else? Anything about the creation, the fall, the flood, Abraham, the patriarchs? We've been going through this line, and I hope you're starting to realize how everything is really connected. And we're not even in the New Testament yet. You know, it's pretty awesome. You know,